In Truth Lies in Alzheimer's, Its Secret Faces, Lisa Skinner offers an unconventional path to peace of mind for families facing Alzheimer's and dementia. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Lisa Skinner is a behavioral expert in the field of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. In her 25-year career as a community counselor, private advisor, and regional director of senior care facilities, she's helped thousands of families find the best care options for their loved ones. Her previous book was the #1 selling Not All Who Wander Need Be Lost. She joins us to talk about Truth Lies in Alzheimer's, Its Secret Faces. Lisa, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it very, very much.
Well, before we talk about the book specifically, I want to draw upon your expertise regarding a question I'm sure a lot of us wonder about, not only for our loved ones, but for ourselves. And that's, when do we become concerned? Because as we get older, we start experiencing some memory lapses. We may not be able to find a word, although it may turn up later. And give us some guidance here. What's normal, and when should we be concerned that there's something else going on?
That is the $64 million question, and I am asked that on a regular basis. And there is a difference between what we call normal aging forgetfulness, and then there's an intermediate stage that we refer to as mild cognitive impairment, and then there's full-blown dementia. So the best way for me to kind of differentiate for the audience really when to be concerned is when the memory loss becomes much more severe and much more significant than walking into a room and forgetting why you walked in there. It happens to all of us. That is part of normal aging. Having a conversation with somebody, and then all of a sudden the name that you're going to say flies out of your head. That's very normal. Not remembering where you put your phone down or your keys. These are all part of the normal aging forgetfulness process. Not to be worried. Then there's the intermediate stage, which we call mild cognitive impairment, which really is a more severe and more frequent occurrence than what you experience with the normal aging process. But it still is not significantly impacting your activities of daily life. Now, the one thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, and I want to just make sure that this is clear because it's an important point. Mild cognitive impairment sometimes is a precursor to full-blown dementia, but only if the root cause of the cognitive decline, the symptoms that you're experiencing, are due to a neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's. But it's not the case in every situation. There are medical conditions that people are suffering that a lot of times they don't even know about, like a urinary tract infection, a thyroid condition, depression. There are a host of medical conditions that can mirror the same symptomology that we see with dementia, but it's not caused by one of these brain diseases like Alzheimer's. So they can be managed. They can be cured with antibiotics or whatever treatment, thyroid medication. And a lot of times in those cases, the symptoms are reversible. That's not the case if somebody is developing Alzheimer's disease. So one of the main things to remember is if a person notices that their cognitive hiccups, let's call them, are continuing to happen more frequently and more severely, and maybe get to the point where They are missing appointments, or they're having trouble following directions or using simple appliances. Those are red flags. One of the biggest red flag is they start asking the same question over and over again in the same conversation, or repeating the same story in the same conversation. That's a big one. So, when the cognitive decline, the memory lapses really start interfering with a person's daily life functioning, then that is cause for concern, and you really should then be assessed by a medical professional.
Well, you've written 2 books now regarding Alzheimer's
Yeah.
and dementia, and we're not going to have time to go through everything that's in this book. So could you give us a brief overview of what people are going to find here? Then we'll dig into a few specifics.
Okay. So one of the probably most profound observations that I've made in the 30 years that I have been helping families through this difficult journey is that there seems to be a clear lack of understanding of exactly what these brain diseases, and there are about 200 known brain diseases that cause similar symptoms, that we put into this bucket that we call dementia. And they differ from person to person, but the one common denominator that I have realized is people aren't clear on exactly what these diseases are doing to our brains, and the symptoms that are a result of the changing brain, the damage being done to the brain, is much more severe and much more complicated than just memory loss and confusion. And that's really what most people associate dementia with, like Alzheimer's disease. And that's not the case. The crux of the situation is that we eventually lose pretty much all of our cognitive functionability. So we lose our ability to reason. We lose our ability to use judgment about things. Our personalities change. We start relying on raw emotion to react to any given situation that pretty much happens in our environments. And these are all things that people don't necessarily look for. So they don't expect these behavioral expressions or these behavioral changes, because they're not necessarily associating these other symptoms with being part of the disease. So I wrote the book as a resource, as a means to help people understand what it is truly like to live with Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body disease or frontotemporal dementia on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour basis. And that's the place that everybody, if you happen to receive a dementia diagnosis, then that's the place to start. And that was really the sole purpose of the book, is to give people, raise awareness and to give people a better understanding of what to expect so they can be more prepared. And what I have observed is once you get that diagnosis, people are in a constant state of being reactive because they don't know what to expect. They don't understand the disease. So by understanding, that's going to put people in a better situation to be more prepared and proactively go through this journey with the person they're caring for or with their family member than what I've seen, because they don't clearly understand what the symptomology actually involves with these brain diseases.
Your book is described as an unconventional approach. And is that part of it? You think that people conventionally just are reactive and you are encouraging people to be proactive regarding these conditions?
That's exactly right, Dan. And the reason why I did make that statement because the best practices, the most effective responses to a lot of the things that we see as the brain is changing is counterintuitive to the way that we instinctively want to respond to some of the behaviors we see. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. One of the things that's really common in people living with these brain diseases is they have delusions or false beliefs. So it's not uncommon for somebody with dementia to believe that their late spouse is still alive and well and maybe waiting for them at home. Our gut, the way we're all wired, our instinctive reaction would be what? To correct them, to try to steer them back into our reality. But the honest truth is they believe that person is still alive, and that is their reality. It's just not aligned with our reality, and it doesn't work. We tried that approach for decades called reality orientation therapy. It doesn't work. It only creates more anxiety, more frustration for the person living with the dementia, and can actually exacerbate the situation and send them into what we call a catastrophic reaction or a total meltdown. It's synonymous with having a meltdown. So the new approach is, and I refer to this in my book, a person-centered approach to dementia care. And part of that methodology is to do what we call join their reality, meet them where they're at, because we found out through reality orientation therapy that did not work, that there's nothing any of us can say or do to convince somebody who's having a false belief that it's not their truth. So we have to meet them where they're at and join their belief and their truth until their brain kind of, their short-term memory comes back to being aligned with our reality. And that's what we've discovered, and that's the state of the art, the popular methodology of teaching. So that's what I meant by unconventional approach, because it is counterintuitive. We are not instinctively wired to go along with somebody's belief if it's not aligned with ours. It's just part of our human nature. So we literally have to retrain our brains and learn to communicate a little differently when we're dealing with brain diseases.
So, one of the things I'm sure people are wondering about is because there's so much we still don't know about many of these brain diseases. Is there anything we can do to try to prevent those? Does it have to do with nutrition? Does it have to do with mental activity? What can we do?
There are a host of risk factors that play into either increasing a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease or one of the other brain diseases, or conversely, minimizing that risk. There are several of these risk factors that we call non-modifiable. It's age, genetics, ethnicity, and gender. And we can't change any of those risk factors. So if every single one of those risk factors that puts you in the higher risk category applies to, you as an individual, then that's 4 risk factors kind of working against you. Then there are another set of risk factors that we refer to as modifiable. And the number one risk factor that can be managed or treated that we put into this category of modifiable risk factors is cardiovascular disease. So if you suffer from hypertension or high blood pressure, if you have a heart condition, that's the number one risk factor that increases a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. There's lifestyle choices, exercising, cognitive stimulation, diet, Then there's other underlying diseases that play a role into either increasing your risk or minimizing your risk. And that's if you have like sleep apnea or diabetes. There's a huge list. But the point being is the more of these risk factors that apply to any one individual increases their risk. But to kind of piggyback on your question, there is no known prevention. These diseases does not discriminate against anybody. It can strike anybody at any time. However, we do know now through scientific research and studies, decades-long studies, that a person can actually minimize their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by making healthier and better lifestyle choices by up to 40%, starting at any age, at any stage of their life. So that would be developing a routine exercise program, following a healthier diet lifestyle. So eliminating simple carbohydrates and ultra processed foods is the worst, which a lot of fast foods fall into that category. Eating more lean meats versus red meats, leafy green vegetables, fruits. Also adopting a regimen of cognitive stimulation exercises, the number one best thing that we know we can do, especially as we get older, to stimulate our brains is to learn a foreign language or a musical instrument, because the parts of our brains that we use to achieve those activities really makes us work. It's critical thinking skills. So these are some of the things that we know can minimize our risk. Does it work all the time? No. But it's significant enough. We know it's significant enough that it's worth implementing healthy lifestyle decisions and practices that, by the time you're 85, if you're not one in the 3 people today who will develop Alzheimer's disease by the age of 85, then you might be able to attribute it to adopting these lifestyle changes and managing the medical conditions that you have. Hearing loss is a huge risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease, but it's manageable. How? We wear hearing aids. If you have sleep apnea, use a CPAP machine. These things can make a critical difference in minimizing a person's risk.
One of the things I take from your book and our discussion is that the more information we have, the better it helps us be prepared and help us to be proactive. But part of the problem is, for a lot of people, there are many myths out there about Alzheimer's that are going to get in the way of making informed and correct decisions. So tell us a little bit about some of the common myths about Alzheimer's and dementia.
Oh, there's so many out there, Dan, and it's very frustrating because they do influence how people think about these diseases. One of them, which is very common and popular, is that this is only an older person's disease. That's absolutely not true. We are seeing a higher instance of what we call early onset dementia, which actually the symptomology appears before the age of 65 versus traditional Alzheimer's disease, which typically starts showing up beginning at the age of 65. And then for every 5 years that we age past the age of 65, our risk almost doubles. So when you're 70, when you're 75, when you're 80, and then by the time we're 85, 1 in 3 of us will have it. But early onset, which is a rarer form of Alzheimer's disease, is showing up in younger and younger people. As a matter of fact, For the longest time, I think I had read through my research that the youngest was about 30 years old. More recently, the youngest now was diagnosed at 19 years old. And we're not really sure why we're seeing this trend. Could be environmental factors. Nobody knows. To date, to be honest with you, we still don't even know what causes Alzheimer's disease. The theories are changing as we continue research and studies. Used to believe that, okay, it's these plaques and tangles that form in the brain. Now that's questionable because not everybody who has these plaques and tangles has Alzheimer's disease and vice versa. So there's other theories out there now that they're questioning, well, maybe it's not just the plaques and tangles. Maybe there's something else, inflammation of the brain, so we still today don't know what actually causes Alzheimer's disease.
Well, there's so much more in this book that we haven't had time to talk about. What would you say are some of the key concepts that you hope readers are going to take away after reading your book?
The key concepts. So I just want to preface answering that question by saying we truly are, as a society, a global society in the midst of a health crisis. And the reason why I make that strong statement is because the World Health Organization and the various Alzheimer's associations from all over the world are preparing us that if a cure or a treatment is not found, and right now we have nothing on the horizon, that the number of people who will develop Alzheimer's disease by the year 2050, do the math, that's 25 short years away, is going to triple from the number of people who live with it today. Currently, it's the sixth leading cause of death in the elderly population in the US, but in the UK, in Finland, and in the Netherlands, it's the number one cause of death in our elderly population. So I call it the tsunami that's on its way. So to answer your question, because it's directly related to what I just said, we're not prepared for the number of people who are projected to develop Alzheimer's disease or one of the other brain diseases in the next 25 years. How can we be more prepared? Through knowledge, through education, through learning specialized skills on how to communicate effectively with people who can no longer or eventually will no longer be able to communicate with us in the way that they do when their brains are healthy. And these are all critical components to trying to solve a problem that is clearly on its way. And this is what it's going to take. So I've dedicated my career to raising this awareness because I've had 8 of my own family members. I don't know if you read that in the book, but besides choosing this as my professional career, I actually have had 8 of my own family members live with one of the diseases that causes dementia. And I have to honestly say, plus the families that I've guided through this journey, it's probably one of the most difficult undertakings that any of us will ever experience because of all the cognitive function that is lost in the process of this disease. It completely changes the playing field for all of us trying to care for somebody that as they progress through the disease, they eventually will be completely 100% dependent on somebody else caring for them and helping them with all of their activities of daily living.
To learn more, the book is Truth Lies in Alzheimer's: Its Secret Faces by Lisa Skinner. Lisa, thank you for talking with me today.
Thanks again for having me and for supporting this very, very important topic.
If you'd like to purchase Truth Lies in Alzheimer's, I placed a link for you in the description below. If you appreciate this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.